foundation for doing things. And we like to have our research kind of inform future programming. So we not only do the research, but we like to follow up with our research as well in terms of building out programming to kind of address these equitable issues. We've been really focused on tech in Greater Philadelphia for some time now, because we see it as really growing the region's tech workforce can be an equitable opportunity. And I sort of emphasize can be because we have to make sure that we have kind of all the policy decision-making behind it and sort of the trends behind it kind of going on the right direction. But really, the two main reasons we see it as an equitable opportunity is, one, it's always good to be investing on tech. It's always a smart move to invest in the future, right? Tech is always evolving, always growing. There's new jobs, there's new technologies, there's new programming at every corner. So this is sort of an opportunity to grow and advance, and an industry that's really investing in tech is really sort of ahead of its time in that way. We see that with the San Francisco, Seattles, and Bostons of the world. And the other side of it too is that we see this as an equitable in that most tech employers have kind of woken up to the idea that you don't need the traditional sort of credentialing of employment found in other positions. People can teach themselves tech skills, and really we're not so much worried about where did you go, in terms of getting your tech job, but what can you do, and what sort of talent do you have, and what skill sets do you have? And those skill sets can be developed in the non-traditional senses as well as in the traditional senses as well. So you can go to get an associate's degree in sort of learning computer science or a programming language or IT or that nature. You can go to the various boot camps that are out there. You can teach it to yourself. There's so many more resources out there, and employers are really waking up to the fact of, this is an opportunity, and this is sort of, anyone can kind of pick up on this opportunity. Those who don't face the more sort of harder barriers of looking at the traditional ways of schooling or teaching themselves. So that being said, I'm going to talk to you about our leading indicator report on tech. We kind of do this annually. So our leading indicator series is, we're covering a whole vast array of economic and development issues. And every once in a while with new data, we kind of look at the tech sector of Greater Philadelphia for the exact reasons I outlined. But the biggest question that I always get when looking at this is how do we measure tech? And really, economists are terrible at measuring tech, because tech is not necessarily its own industry or its own sector. It's that sector that sort of proliferates or is really seated in so many other sectors. So really, you can have a computer programmer working at a financial firm, a software developer working for a major medical insurer, or a data analyst working in local government. You can find tech in so many different industries, existing industries, that it's really hard to kind of get it all into one area and measure it as one thing only. So that being said, besides that, you can also find a lot of tech skill set in what are non-tech occupations. A high school teacher can teach his students how to code or how to program. So that sort of has always made it elusive for economists. So we kind of work with the best resources we have and the best data out there. And I kind of outlined for you there the two standard choices tech usually are federal data sources, particularly the Bureau of Labor Statistics offers a bunch of different sort of ways to measure industries and occupations, sort of in an annual basis. And then job posting data, which is a little more expensive, but can kind of get you at where the trend's going right now, what industries are hiring and what companies are hiring tech the most. You're kind of at the discretion of who is the provider of those job posting data. They get to kind of decide how they're sort of defining tech occupations in a certain way. So there's pros and cons to each. Federal data is usually about a year or two behind. Job posting data can be like up to date by the day, depending on who's providing it as well. But if you're looking at sort of overall growth of employment and wages, which is typically we at the Economy League are focused on, you're going to really, lean into that federal data more. And that's what we have done these past couple of years. We've been using the Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics Program's annual survey of all occupations in a metropolitan region. And I say all occupations with a verbal asterisk there, because all occupations as defined by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So these are the tech jobs that we've outlined, that we've been measuring on an annual basis here. Obviously not as exhaustive as the tech industry would really be. For us, this is about finding those sort of core tech occupations, those primarily tech occupations where you can find a software developer in the healthcare industry, in the transportation industry, and in all these other industries, and sort of excluding those tech occupations that are industry specific. So if you're a health technician or sort of medical records, data entry, you're in the healthcare industry. So we did kind of shorten the measure of the industry as well. But for us, this is getting at sort of the core. And if you can kind of get at the core, plus or minus a couple thousand will get you better in range for the entire sort of technical, the tech workforce here. So these are sort of the measurements that we're looking at, and I will be providing the slides to Technically afterward to kind of share out if they want to. So let's get into it. Greater Philadelphia's tech concentration has been growing in recent years. Obviously, we have a lower concentration in Greater Philadelphia of our tech workforce than the average US metropolitan region, but we're talking about like 0.5% on average here. So not that far off. The other thing to notice too here is between the orange line, which is the top 15 US metropolitan regions, and the blue line, which is us, is that we kind of follow the same reverberations, the same hills and valleys that the general, national tech workforce feels as well. So the same dips and the same rises are occurring in all these areas, meaning that any sort of larger industry stuff that's happening out there for the tech industry writ large is also happening here in Greater Philadelphia. The other thing to notice here too is that prior to the pandemic, we were actually growing at twice the rate as the average top US metro region. Yes, we had a smaller concentration slightly, but we were growing at kind of twice the rate. The slope of our line was twice that of the normal average metropolitan region prior to the pandemic. The pandemic makes it look like by 2020 that, wow, tech concentrations really grew in 2020. It's actually a little bit of a statistical anomaly there. What you're actually seeing is we lost a lot of other occupations that it made the tech industry look like the concentration was growing, but actually it remained pretty stable, maybe grew slightly in Greater Philadelphia. But if you think about it as a proportion with tech workforce on top and every other occupation on the bottom, that bottom really shrunk as a result of the pandemic. So that looks like, hey, all our jobs are going up. When in fact, it was like, wow, we lost a lot of other jobs than besides tech. And you're seeing kind of a little bit of the opposite effect in 2021, where we've gained a lot of those occupations back. But adding on top of that is we did see significant decreases in our tech employment in Greater Philadelphia, largely due to what we would say burnout and the Great Resignation in 2021. But I'll get into that a little bit more. So you're kind of, again, you're seeing those hills and valleys. We're kind of in a little bit of a slump right now that we'll talk a little bit more about. Compared to other metropolitan regions in 2021, like I said, Greater Philadelphia kind of at the bottom of the top 15, kind of in the middle to the bottom of the top 15 US metropolitan regions. The thing to kind of like look at here in terms of our concentration, which is sort of the amount in these bar graphs, is a lot of smaller metropolitan regions have larger tech concentrations than we do. Detroit, Phoenix, Atlanta, Boston, San Francisco, Seattle. These are all smaller metropolitan regions than Greater Philadelphia in terms of population size, but a lot of them have much stronger concentrations of tech than we do. So it's just something to think about. The percentages you're seeing there is sort of the decrease from 2020 to 2021. How much did the tech concentration, increase or decrease as sort of an annual percentage, basically? So like, we decreased by 7.4% in terms of our employment numbers in tech, or our concentration, I should say, our concentration numbers, not our employment numbers in tech from 2020 to 2021. Not as bad as a place like Chicago or Detroit or Atlanta, especially, but there were industries that did see growth from 2020 to 2021 who kind of bucked the trend. And no surprises, it's your Seattle and San Francisco at the top there. And for some reason, Houston, which I'm still not entirely sure why. Here's the top 10 tech occupations in 2021 with their median annual salary as well. So this is sort of that reason that we're talking about just like for FYI, Greater Philadelphia's median annual wage as of 2021, according to this survey, is $47,500 a year. So this is what we're talking about when like there's opportunity here to be building sustainable career, family sustaining career building jobs here across sort of all groups and sort of creeds, that this is why we're focusing on tech as sort of an opportunity, an equitable opportunity, if it's kind of geared in the right direction. In terms of occupations here, you're kind of seeing, software developers taking up over 25, a quarter of the employment in 2021 here. It's a little bit both on the development and the production side here. Everyone's kind of pretty well represented there. Those who are kind of developing out the programming and the software, and those who are kind of producing it further, working with the client, working with the customer, and kind of running the administrative side of things. So that's sort of your breakdown for 2021. Pretty standard across metropolitan regions to see this sort of trend. A few others kind of, may have a higher degree of computer programmers or software developers depending on it, but this is pretty standard. Another just sort of interesting quirk out of all this, and I will say I wanted to show you this map. So all of our leading indicator reports all these graphs are interactive in our reports, and as are the maps and everything like that. So you can kind of click around and play with them. I do suggest that you actually go into our reports and play around with the bar graphs and the line graphs to see the actual information in real time. But one interesting thing, especially for me, because my research is kind of community and neighborhood development here, is where do our tech workers live? And by percentage, they're not living in Philadelphia. That's not to say that there aren't any sort of tech workers living in Philadelphia. This is using sort of census residency data here, and the census has slightly different measurements for tech. It's computer and mathematical occupations, they call them. But by percentage, in terms of who are these workers, we're seeing large swaths out into southeastern Pennsylvania suburbs and a little bit in South Jersey, many in Newcastle, Delaware here. But it's percentages. It's also kind of what you're seeing here a little bit, like Philadelphia is so small because we have so many other sort of sector employment and employment types here that, yes, these tech residents may not be a large, they only account for, I believe it's like 2.6% of the total employment of residents in these areas. If you go actually into the raw estimates themselves, Philadelphia comes out as number 2, but it's Montgomery County, who really only has like half the population of Philadelphia, has a larger representation of tech workers living there in Montgomery County than in Philadelphia as well. So just something to think about of like, where are my tech workers living in our region? Mostly out in the suburbs. A large swath of them in Philadelphia, but you're going to find plenty more, or if not the same or more in our suburbs as well. Get back into, all right. So let's talk about the pandemic. Greater Philadelphia's tech workforce expanded and contracted amidst COVID-19. So I kind of showed you the concentration of tech. That was sort of the line graph that we saw before. Here are sort of the raw numbers, as it were. So you can kind of see from 2019 to 2020, in the midst of the pandemic here, we grew by about 410 jobs. So when we're measuring employment, we're not measuring people, we're measuring jobs at the end of the day. So we're talking about a 0.4% increase in employment. So this is when I said, like, it looked like that line jumped really high in that first graph that you saw there. Really, we only increased by 410, and we just lost so many at the bottom sort of the denominator of our occupations, that it looked like tech was really, really growing, kind of staying stable, really. Prior to that, as I said, though, we were growing tech pretty well in Greater Philadelphia. And then now, as of 2021, we've lost about almost 10,000 jobs from 2020 to 2021 in Greater Philadelphia, an 8.9% decline in tech employment for this core sort of tech occupations. There's a lot of theories and hypotheses out there. And I had a discussion with Paige Gross, who kind of wrote this article about this a little bit too. That like you can kind of pull at any string you want here, but probably the most significant sort of theory here is burnout and the Great Resignation. So tech, behind healthcare, tech was the sort of sector that everyone turned to at the midst of the pandemic. We need to be remote. We need sort of support. We need to be able to do our jobs remotely. We need to be able to set up in a virtual setting. There was high demand for tech across the board, across all sort of metropolitan regions, not just Philadelphia. But because of that high demand, come 2021, with sort of a stronger labor market out there, salaries rising, and a bit of burnout among these tech workers, you're seeing sort of a reshuffling right now. That's sort of where the decrease is largely coming from. There are other sort of factors at play here. We saw high numbers of retirement as well, particularly in sort of the software testers, sort of the old school tech, sort of baby boomer tech jobs as well. There was a lot of retirements. we lost a lot of people. A lot of people died during this pandemic as well. Another thing to consider in all this, there's a bunch of different things at play here, but mostly we're talking about burnout and the Great Resignation. We saw that our tech workers are really high demand, needed sort of an opportunity to reevaluate what they were doing, change position, change jobs, change their settings. Some may have moved to other areas, but mostly for this is what we kind of akin this. Going forward, I mean, economics is not a crystal ball. We can speculate, we can kind of look at models and say, this is where things look like they're going towards. To me, I would, if an educated guess, seeing sort of other industries kind of play this out as well, you'll see it kind of bounce back a bit. There's going to be some greater opportunity here. So what does the future hold is really sort of the question there. I mean, one thing that is like abundantly clear is like, we need greater support for our burnt out tech workers. What that support and what those mechanisms look like, I'm not 100% sure. You can talk about labor unions, you can talk about portable benefits, you can talk about sort of guards for your independent contractors. There has to be more sort of bumpers and safeguards for our tech workers, both who are sort of in established companies and corporations and organizations, and those who are individual business owners and independent contractors as well, which there's a high number of those in our tech workforce. Really, that is an opportunity to be competitive right now is, yes, growing our tech jobs and everything like that. But if you're also growing sort of the mechanisms to help in their health and their mental health and their savings and support, you can come out of this kind of being the stellar star of the tech world if you're showing support for them. We're seeing that in sort of those lower wage industries as well. More people are talking about wage and benefits for food accommodations and hospitality and leisure. And those are sort of being able to grab the most opportunity and competition. They're being the most competitive right now because of workers have realized of, hey, I can reevaluate my situation and I can look for a better job. What are sort of the opportunities you can provide? Well, if we can provide you sort of these mechanisms in place, we're going to be more competitive at the end of the day. Like I said, a strong labor market means more opportunities for tech workers. That's kind of what you were seeing in 2021. They had more opportunity to leave their job. If they had stipends or salary increases, one thing that we're seeing as well is that offered more opportunity for those who were not willing to take the plunge before the pandemic to really think about starting their own business or investing in themselves to do a boot camp or go to back to school or do kind of some other sort of professional development as well. You may see sort of the germination of that seeds way back when kind of coming into play by 2022, 2023. Chris kind of alluded to this, like remote working makes tech workers more competitive, but it also increases competition. So depending on if it's remote workers who are looking for employment opportunities in greater Philadelphia, or people who are moving away from the more expensive areas of DC and New York and living in Philadelphia, they might be looking for jobs here or they might be looking for jobs in their other places, but they're coming here anyway. You've now just increased the competition of your tech workers across the board. Particularly, you'll see this more on the Eastern Seaboard is the theory, because our region is we are so close to Baltimore and DC and Boston and New York that competition for these jobs and thinking about the hybrid schedule, if you only have to be in the office once a month, someone can live in Philadelphia and commute to Boston once a month. So there's sort of, you now are becoming there's going to be more competition for our remote tech workers going forward here. We know that. The other interesting piece here to think about, does Greater Philadelphia want or need a center of gravity for tech? As you kind of saw, a lot of our tech workers are living out in the suburbs, and it sort of makes sense. You don't want to say that they're also working out there, but we have plenty of tech, hiring organizations out there. Lockheed Martin, Vanguard, Microsoft, Boeing, QVC, you name it. They all need tech workers as well, and they're all out in the suburbs as well. Comcast is in the city, Independence Blue Cross is in the city, BNY Mellon's in the city. You have some here as well, but do we want a center of gravity? Do we think we need a center of gravity in terms of our tech workforce? That's sort of the ultimate question in all of this, as if we're going more remote or going more hybrid, do we think we need a center of gravity as well? Does Philadelphia want to do that? If it does want to do that, does that mean sort of offering more opportunity for those satellite offices or being more business friendly at the end of the day? We've seen sort of this happen in the past with like Microsoft's Reactor. They tried to come into the city and it just kind of seemed to fizzle out for a variety of reasons. But, do we want to try to attempt that again going forward? So just sort of food for thought going forward. There's plenty more to talk about when it comes to tech. I mean, we didn't even scratch the surface about what the workforce looks like right now, because that could be 4 whole presentations in itself. But if you want to learn more, please subscribe to our leading indicator series. There's a link here for it, to our newsletter. We come out every 2 weeks covering, like I said, a variety of issues way beyond just tech. This past week, we were talking about rising rents and what that means in terms of wage growth in greater Philadelphia. We've talked about inflation. We've talked about where new construction is happening in the city, the whole gamut of economic development issues. So, and also there's my contact. If you have any questions, you want to collaborate, we're always open to serve our fellow businesses and organizations here in greater Philadelphia. So please contact me if you have any research questions or have data you need sort of analyzed, because I'm here.
Thank you so much, Mike. We have a couple questions in the chat.
Sure.
And I also want to ask you if you could share the link to the leading indicator series in the chat as well, so that way folks can easily click on that. But Heloise asks, are we seeing a continued increase and or a leveling off of individuals enrolling and completing IT tech certificate programs and boot camps? What is the percentage of these minorities, and are these opportunities contributing to diversity in the sector?
All great opportunities. I don't have any of the numbers in front of me right now to comment on what the trends are in terms of that. We know that at the beginning of the pandemic, when the stipends were coming out, there was larger sort of interest across groups to look into sort of professional and development opportunities across the board, not just tech. I don't have the numbers in front of me to be able to sort of coherently answer that right now.
Great. And then Chris asked, you mentioned that the suburban countries had a higher percentages of tech workers residency, but the raw number in the city was still high. How do you, have you seen other regions that are similar or different?
Yeah, I mean, like think about Silicon Valley outside of San Francisco, or Redmond outside of Seattle. This is not like, it's kind of par for the course in terms of having large sort of tech organizations and corporations outside as well, who, you know, for a variety of reasons can't fit in the city, don't want to pay certain taxes, you name it. You know, there's a whole sort of a field of study behind why businesses do what they do in or outside of a city. It is kind of normal for the course. Excluding probably New York City, but they're always sort of the outlier in any of these cases. But yeah, it's pretty normal, but it's a matter of who's kind of leading the charge. That's always sort of the interesting conversation. I spent plenty of time up in Boston, and it's sort of Cambridge is kind of leading the charge of the greater Boston sort of tech world rather than Boston itself. And Boston's usually playing second fiddle to Cambridge. Is that what we want? Do we want to be playing second fiddle to King of Prussia and to Malvern as Philadelphia? That's sort of up to the leaders.
And then he follows up, what happened in 2017? It looked like a similar size decrease as in 2021.
Yeah, I looked into it. Not 100% sure. There was a lot, at least on the census side of things, there was a lot of errors in the 2017 census, but that was a different sort of program thing. So I'm not 100% sure. There could have just been an issue with the survey that year. It may have just been kind of an anomaly or just, again, we're talking about like a 0.0 something percent decline. So like the numbers look really like the lines are zoomed in very close. So like the trends look more devastating than they really are. But yeah, I'm not sure. That was always a question for us too, of what happened in 2017.